The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The U.S. now has more than 1,000 troops in Iraq. Late yesterday, the Pentagon announced that they would be sending an additional 130 troops into Iraq. This was in the middle of these humanitarian airdrops that are going on for the Iraqis, the Yazidis that we've told you about that are stuck at the top of Mount Sinjar. And the U.S. is contemplating further rescue missions for the civilians that remain there. They still number in the tens of thousands. We have a statement from a defense official. I will read it to you. Quote, "These forces will not be engaged in a combat role. They will work closely with representatives from the U.S. Department of State and USAID to coordinate plans with international partners and non-government organizations committed to helping the Yazidi people." Remember, President Obama pledged no boots on the ground. And sending these forces into Iraq to do such planning work and rescue work, etc., could potentially put them in direct contact with the ISIS, Islamic State fighters. So when we think about the definition of no boots on the ground, you can have boots on the ground as long as it's not direct combat, I think, Lewis, is generally the understanding. But if you're doing a rescue mission, you're rescuing people from something or someone, and potentially you could come in contact with that thing.
I would assume so. It seems like anything can happen. Am I going to be upset if that does happen? I'd expect that to happen, and I think it was foolish for Obama to make that promise when clearly things are getting worse and our involvement seems to be more necessary as time goes on.
So as far as the numbers go, before yesterday's announcement about these 130 additional troops, we knew about 800 troops in Iraq, and there were, of course, many more that the military has not publicly acknowledged but are more or less understood to exist to some degree. So we already assumed the number was over 1,000. Now we're essentially at 1,000 that we specifically know about because the government has told us. And if you add in those others, Lewis, when we talked about the initial 300, I said 300 can become 1,000 pretty quickly. And 1,000 can get to 2,500 not that much later. We've certainly gone about halfway in that direction.
Yep. But it's necessary, unfortunately. I don't like it, but, I would almost feel better if we had more troops there trying to quell this violent uprising.
Yeah, in other words, this is all happening because of what the U.S. did in Iraq. Now it almost would make you feel worse if we said, well, we broke it enough and created this crazy situation, and now we're just going to write off any problems that happen as a result.
It's pretty much our fault. I don't know if it's enough to just continue with airstrikes. We know about the problems with airstrikes. A lot of these fighters are in civilian areas. So maybe troops is the best bet, but I certainly don't like putting them in harm's way.
I have some unfortunately depressing news for you. There was this study I told you about a couple of months ago, I think it was, and it showed how likely are people's political desires, how likely are those desires to be translated into law based on that individual's socioeconomic standing. And as it turned out, the richer you were, the more likely it was that the desires you had in terms of policy were to become actual law. And this made us say, wait a second, this seems to be evidence of that plutocratic system that we've been talking about for so long, that the legislative priorities of our elected officials don't seem to actually reflect those of the average person. We now have further news along these lines. This is just disgusting. I have really no other way to soften this. There's a new study by two political science professors which found that ordinary Americans have virtually no impact whatsoever on the making of national policy in the United States. The analysts found that rich individuals and business-controlled interest groups largely shape policy in this country. The study is called Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, interest groups, and average citizens. It will be in the fall 2014 edition of Perspectives on Politics. And what it shows is that when looking at 1,779 national policy issues for which they could gauge the preferences of average citizens, economic elites, and mass-based interest groups and business-dominated interest groups, the outcomes tended to go in the direction of those favored by the interest groups and by the economic elites, and had a very, very small correlation to the desires of average and ordinary citizens. The analysts found, this is the key line from the entire thing, the analysts found that when controlling for the power of economic elites and organized interest groups, the influence of ordinary Americans registers at a non-significant near zero level. The analysts further discovered that rich individuals and business-dominated interest groups dominate the policy-making process. If the views of the citizens and the economic elites and the business groups were the same, this might not be that much of a concern. As we know, though, that is absolutely not the case, and we see yet more evidence that we are not maybe going in the direction of a completely plutocratic society where the rich and elites have their desires reflected by the government and legislators, whereas the average American does not. We're there right now, Louis.
It's interesting to think about situations in which you think that policy, or a certain law was enacted in favor of just the normal people, maybe like marijuana legalization or something like that. But then when you think about it behind the scenes, chances are Philip Morris, big tobacco companies, big farm companies and farmers, lots of rich people probably thought that they could make a lot of money off that. So maybe that's the only reason it passed.
And this is why I'm not optimistic about when I hear about all of the FCC comments, the comments that were made to the FCC regarding net neutrality. That's great. But I'm not that optimistic because of studies like this, which show us that ultimately it is the desires of the rich and the big corporations and their lobbyists that will actually be made into law. Is it a viable strategy, I wonder, I'm just thinking out loud here, to try to influence as individual citizens, to try to influence the rich and big corporations, to try to get them to see that they should support what the average citizen wants? I mean, is it a better strategy at this point to just try to kind of co-opt the desires of the rich? Maybe that would be more effective.
Unless you can convince them that there is a lot of money involved in whatever you're proposing for them, I don't see the point. It would be completely futile.
Yeah, well, that's what we're really getting to. If we could disconnect money from politics and interrupt the influence buying that is really at the heart of all of this, that's really the primary and most important step right now, because we're living in a plutocratic society, ladies and gentlemen. The studies show it. There are drastically differing accounts about why a police officer fatally shot unarmed Michael Brown on a street in Ferguson, Missouri this weekend. The two stories could not be more different. One side says that the teenager, Michael Brown, was surrendering, his hands in the air to show that he was unarmed, when the officer opened fire. Authorities instead are saying that Brown attacked the officer in his car and tried to take his gun. These accounts could not be more different. Investigators have released very few details about the deadly encounter. They say only that the scuffle unfolded after the officer, who was just on a routine patrol, asked Michael Brown and another teen to get out of the street on Saturday afternoon. Presumably, at some point, the officer's weapon fired inside a patrol car, according to the St. Louis County Police Department, which is handling the investigation here. We have one full story surrounding this shooting, and this is from Michael Brown's friend, Dorian Johnson, who said he was walking home with Brown when they were approached by an officer in a squad car who told him to move over to the sidewalk. Johnson told news crews that he and Brown kept walking and the officer reversed his car to where it almost hit them. The officer, according to Johnson, tried to open his door, but it ricocheted back. Johnson said the officer reached through the window, grabbed my friend around the neck, and tried to pull him into the car. The officer then reportedly pulled out his weapon and said, "I'll shoot you or I'm going to shoot." Police said there has been absolutely no video of this confrontation. Protests, tens of thousands of individuals in St. Louis arriving for essentially just demanding more information, if nothing else. In the last 30 or so minutes before we went to air, Lewis, we did hear from the police department saying that while they are still not telling us the race of the police officer involved, even though according to the witness, the police officer is white, all but 3 police officers in this department are white. And they are not telling us the name of the officer because of fear of death threats and danger to the officer, that they've confirmed that the officer has physical characteristics, or there is physical evidence that the officer was involved in a scuffle, which supposedly, according to them, supports the story being told by the police department. This, Lewis, is there are set parts of this that feel George Zimmerman-like, except here we're talking not about a wannabe police officer, but an actual police officer, and who knows if we will ever find out the real story of what happened that day.
It's very unfortunate that there were not more witnesses. Who am I going to believe here? My first instinct is to believe the witness.
Well, I'll tell you what, Lewis, when I think about the witness has recounted the story to numerous media outlets, and the story is incredibly consistent. Now, not that consistency alone is evidence of truth, but the fact that it remains consistent is definitely an interesting factor to me here.
That certainly helps his story in general. All the stories we cover about police brutality, excessive use of force, police corruption, I am inclined at this point to just believe the people when it comes to matters like this, and not to believe what the police say. Unfortunately, that's where I'm at. We're
not jumping to conclusions necessarily. This is kind of the direction we're feeling right now. If the police would just give us more information, then maybe it would help to ascertain the reality of what happened there. But so far, when we look at what we do know, this is at the very best, right? In the best of cases, a very questionable situation that needs a very specific and detailed and extensive investigation. At worst, it's something far worse than that. But Lewis, we'll just have to wait and see as the information is released, if and when it is.
I assume it will be. There's been such outrage over this. It may take some time. Police departments, they're walking on eggshells right now. They have to take their time and be very careful about this whole thing.
There's a new study out which says that if you want to reduce violent crime, homicides, as well as racial bias, you should repeal stand your ground laws. This is a set of new recommendations from the American Bar Association Task Force. They did a 62-page preliminary report, which doesn't outright call for the repeal of all stand your ground laws, but it suggests that stand your ground laws may be, quote, a solution searching for a problem, and that stand your ground laws are associated with increased homicide rates, that they reinforce racial bias, and that any state concerned with these problems should probably do something about it. Very interesting. This is the first recent study on stand your ground laws specifically. Quote from the report: the application of stand your ground laws is unpredictable, uneven, and results in racial disparities. They also said that the shoot first laws shift the emphasis to instinctual gunfire and have done absolutely nothing to decrease violent crime rates. In fact, listen to this, states that have these laws have seen increases in homicides and have seen a rash of troubling, racially biased anecdotes emerge, according to several of the reports compiled by this broader meta-analysis. We've heard nothing good about stand your ground laws, said task force co-chair Jack Middleton. So, Lewis, I happen to agree with this report, right? But as social scientists, we should want to explore other possible explanations for data. While the report implies that it is the stand your ground laws that are in a causal relationship with increased and more homicides, we have to ask another question. And I don't know the answer to this. I'm asking this question because it's a question that must be asked. Is it possible that stand your ground laws, were they to be repealed, might result in these states, which with the stand your ground laws have higher homicide rates, having even higher homicide rates? In other words, this study alone does not tell us that there is a causal relationship between stand your ground and higher homicide rates. It does indicate that there is a correlation, and that is important. But I think that it would be good if we are to convince anyone to have a deeper analysis that might look at the causal relationship here.
And of course, that would be a very difficult study, because you would have to get rid of these laws in one of those states. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see that information for quite a long time.
No question about it. And to be honest, when I really think about this, is anyone really going to have their mind changed by that if they believe now that stand your ground laws are a really, really great thing and are blindly supporting them? It's unlikely that even that study would be accepted as unbiased, accurate, precise, and worthy of paying attention to. It is Wednesday. We have Patriot Mail coming up right after this first break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that if you do any shopping on Amazon.com, the shopping you're doing could be supporting our show. Simply go to our website, davidpakman.com, and click on the Amazon banner on the right side of the page. Bookmark it, use it whenever you shop, and Amazon will send us a kickback for the shopping you already plan to do. You can also become a David Pakman Show member, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. If you're worried about liberal bias in statistics, facts, and other reality-based things, liberalbias.com will show you how to unskew reality, making it easier for conservatives to handle. Check out liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is James Kaplan. James, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You are a very, very important part of the expansion of this program over the last 8 years. You can join James as a David Pakman Show member and get all of the great member benefits by going to davidpakman.com/membership. It's Wednesday, and it is time for Patriot Mail.
Patriot Mail, your break from the tyranny of unbiased independent media. Because knowledge and information are just communist conspiracies. Patriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman.
Right.
Because America. And because freedom.
So I don't really have much to say about this week's Patriot Mail. I really only have a question about it, which is, can you, members of our audience, explain to me what this Patriot Mail is about? Because I've listened to it so many times now, any number of times, I would say. And I just can't figure out what is being discussed in this one. Take a listen to this.
David Lefty Pakman, I just ran across your pathetic attempt to blast Fox News. It strikes me a bit odd that the name Pac-Man being interviewed happens to have the same name as you. When are you liberals going to start understanding the truth?
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet $1 million you have never served this country. You are an immigrant, as the other 42 million are. Go back to Argentina. I will pay the airfare. You are a pathetic disgrace to my country. Imagine me going to Argentina and blasting your people, soldiers, and the men killed serving your country. I really hope you keep the good book close to you. You are going to need it.
Man, I just don't know what that's about. I mean, yes, it's true I'm an immigrant. I am an American citizen, though. I think that should be considered, Lewis, as well. But what does it mean? There was a Pakman being interviewed who happens to have the same name as me. Who is this person? Where were they being interviewed? What does this have to do with Fox News? I don't understand what this is about.
Maybe it was you. I don't know. Patriots tend to be confused about a lot of things, and I have no idea what this is about.
Yeah, if you, as a member of our audience, have any insight into this, please email me, because I would, maybe there's some kind of brilliant point being made. It would be buried deep, very, very deep in that message, but maybe it is in there somewhere. Let me know if you have any sense of what on earth is going through this individual's mind. So as we of course talked about yesterday, according to police, Robin Williams, 63-year-old actor, committed suicide. Rush Limbaugh didn't seem to think that the explanation from sheriffs made any sense, that the explanations from his family made any sense, and instead wanted to put forward the hypothesis that it may have been actually the leftist worldview which led to Robin Williams' suicide. Yeah, I don't really understand it either. It is, of course, despicable that now Rush Limbaugh is getting involved in this type of very, very improper speculation about something which he appears to know nothing about as a general rule. Let's listen to what Rush Limbaugh had to say yesterday on his program.
What is the left's worldview in general? What is, if you had to attach not a philosophy, but an attitude to a leftist worldview? It's one of pessimism and darkness, sadness. They're never happy, are they? They're always angry about something. No matter what they get, they're always angry. And they are animated in large part by the false promises of America. Because the promises of America are not for everyone, as we see each and every day. I mean, right here, there's a story, Fox News website. Do you know, it says right here, that the real reasons that Robin Williams killed himself, well, he was embarrassed at having to take television roles after a sterling movie career.
It's very interesting to me that yesterday we had Shepard Smith on Fox News suggest that Robin Williams' suicide may have been an act of cowardice, when the reality is, we know suicide is not an act of cowardice if you understand what's going on for the individual. And it was Shepard Smith, who is a closeted gay man, who you'd think would understand that in the same way that being closeted is not an act of cowardice, suicide is not an act of cowardice. Now we have Rush Limbaugh saying that it is the leftist worldview which is responsible for the anger and unhappiness of Robin Williams. And when you look at Rush Limbaugh, you see a guy who is very, very rich, extraordinarily wealthy. He is this kind of overweight former drug addict on his third marriage, who clearly has a lot of anger, which we hear come through on his program, and clearly, by any reasonable indication, is not happy. People in glass houses continuing to throw stones, Lewis.
I remember all the things he used to say about drug addicts and all the pro-family things he said, and he is the world's biggest hypocrite. And sometimes I think that he's just trying to upset people when he talks about things like this.
Maybe so. And even think about the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. Have you ever seen them not be angry and just be happy, right? It's always the hate them, they're not like us, hate the Democrats, hate the half-black president, hate, hate, hate. It's very strange, these kind of hypocritical statements we're hearing, and you can never really predict what's going to be the catalyst for them. In this case, it happened to be Robin Williams' suicide, but it really could be anything. Very, very strange. I want to follow up on Rand Paul. Remember last week we had this video of two immigrants approaching Senator Rand Paul and Congressman Steve King, both Republicans, and wanting to talk to them about being dreamers and being immigrants. And Rand Paul dropped his hamburger mid-bite and just got the hell out of there, right? And he now did a follow-up interview where he was asked, why did you run away? Why did you flee? He explained he didn't flee. It was a kamikaze interview, and he had another interview to do. Here's what Rand Paul had to say.
No question you're in Iowa, that beautiful cornfield behind you, and there's been a video that has gone somewhat viral among the media, at least, in which you are sitting having lunch with Congressman King, and suddenly some young person comes up to him and says the person's a dreamer and engages in sort of a controversial conversation with Congressman King about being a dreamer. You shake the hand, and then you are seen getting up after you have a bite of your hamburger and grabbing your drink as though you're trying to get away. What's the explanation for this video?
Well, now you know my life. You know my life on the campaign trail. But about 5 minutes before that, or 2 minutes before that, the video doesn't show that another reporter came up and said, will you do an interview? And I said, I need to take a couple more bites and we'll do an interview. And then I was told we had to leave and I had to do the interview. So actually I stand about 10 feet from those people who were doing sort of a kamikaze interview. And I stood 10 feet from them and did another interview. And you know me, I've always been open to discussing immigration.
The aide who we saw in the old video whisking away Rand Paul said to the National Journal that Paul had a media avail after the event, and that's where they had to be. Rand Paul says it was a kamikaze interview, but he doesn't say that he realized he had to get to this media avail mid-hamburger. That's what was the funny thing, Lewis. Well, no, we just had to get, I was doing interviews. I was 10 feet away doing interviews. You all of a sudden realized you had to do the interview mid-hamburger 5 seconds after someone comes up and wants to talk to you about immigration. The story is laughably absurd, and every time he opens his mouth about it, it gets even funnier.
I can't, maybe what he's saying is true. Maybe he was on a tight schedule and there was a specific time he agreed to do this interview, or one of his, aides told him he had to do this interview and he had to do it.
Well,
maybe,
I'd love to know
who. But it certainly does not look like that.
I'd love to know who the reporter was that did that interview, and that reporter's name and the subject of that interview and the story or piece that was produced around that interview. They do it on both sides, though, right? It's just like when that nut Joe the plumber went up to President Obama. Obama ran away. Oh, wait a second. No, Obama talked to the guy extensively and actually tried to address his concerns. It was just Joe the plumber who didn't want to hear them. So I guess not everybody handles these the exact same way.
Not everyone. I still don't like the tactic, but it does make for some compelling video.
I don't disagree with you, Lewis, but the thing is, these guys will not actually back up what they say and talk to people about it. So people often are left with very little choice but this. I agree with you. As an individual, you're just trying to eat your hamburger, you're at an event. But if you actually won't really address the concerns of people, you'll only give sanitized talking points on corporate media, people run out of choices. So I understand that as well. Facebook.com/David Pakman Show. Visit us on Facebook. Give us a like. We will be back after this. So much more today, including, do you remember when the so-called Indians drank burning water? Incredible.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Comcast really wants to buy Time Warner Cable, and they have no shortage of ways, some subtle, some pretty obvious, of trying to push the odds further in their favor. They've targeted philanthropy, they've targeted sponsorships, all of these things are part of their strategy. But now they've decided to spend six figures, $110,000, honoring a sitting FCC commissioner named Minion Clyburn, who gets to make decisions about things like, oh, I don't know, media mergers, which might seem like they're a little bit out of bounds to you and me. And Politico reports that Comcast and Time Warner have together contributed $132,000, $110 from Comcast, $22 from Time Warner Cable, to sponsor the Walter Cates Foundation's annual dinner in September. The companies have had a long relationship with the Cates Foundation, which promotes diversity in the cable industry. But this year's honoree is, as I mentioned, FCC Commissioner Minion Clyburn. So the timing certainly raises eyebrows. Comcast is just shocked that anybody would suggest there would be anything untoward going on, or that they may be, by virtue of this sponsorship, trying to sway favor in their direction. Carrie Levine, who's a research director for Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, wrote in a blog post, The timing is curious. They're honoring an FCC commissioner at the exact same time they're trying to get approval for a merger. That doesn't look so good. Lewis, talk about the understatement of the decade. The timing is curious.
Curious, right. We were just talking about plutocracies. Could this possibly stink any more than it does right now? How could this get any more ridiculous?
Well, it looks more ridiculous when you consider that last month Comcast tried to throw a whole bunch of money at the home of an anti-municipal broadband state senator in Kansas. Comcast insists there is nothing untoward going on. They say, we absolutely dispute the notion that our contributions have anything to do with currying favor with Commissioner Clyburn or any honoree. This is how quickly this argument falls apart. Comcast is a publicly traded company. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. If you believe that Comcast is not funding them for their own, funding this event for their own fiduciary best interests, they are actually violating their responsibility to shareholders. In order to justify this expenditure, they need to be able to tell shareholders why it is they're spending $110,000 to honor an FCC commissioner. If they can't do that, then it is actually the trust that has been placed in them by the shareholders has been violated. And as we've talked about many times, right, they wouldn't be donating to all of these members of Congress who ultimately will oversee decisions regarding big media mergers. They wouldn't be funding stuff like this. This is millions and millions of dollars that, if you believe Comcast is just nice, they're just nice, Lewis. They just want to fund stuff that they believe in. They happen to like the members of Congress who will oversee big media mergers. If you believe that, then Comcast is just wasting money. And thus should be, you would think the executive staff would be replaced because they're just spending money in such a stupid way.
Well, actions do speak louder than words. And the shareholders know, we know, basically everyone involved knows that this is money that is an investment that hopefully will make the shareholders tons of money. They don't need to say it. Everyone knows it.
A Colorado Republican state senator justified the practice of hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, by saying that the fact that there are burnable amounts of methane gas in drinking water is perfectly natural. It's no big deal. He said that, quote, the Indians used it for warmth in the wintertime. I'm going to play the video. You'll notice that he's being interviewed. This is State Senator Randy Baumgardner, a Republican. He's being interviewed by former Navy chaplain Gordon Klingenschmitt, a frequent longtime guest on this program, who is interviewing him for his Pray in Jesus' Name news hour or something like that. Let's listen to this insanity.
And there should be a free market opportunity for people who own that farmland to drill for oil or to harvest coal or natural gas or solar without the government picking and choosing and subsidizing some while overtaxing others.
Absolutely. And I've been to a lot of the fracking seminars, and if people, they've never been and they really don't understand it, most of these are free. Most of these seminars are free they can go to. They can learn about fracking. They can learn that the myth of, you know, at 9 or 11,000 feet, that fluid is going to come back to the surface. And since the 1940s, when they first started fracking, there's never been one recorded incident. They talk about methane in the water and this, that, and the other. But if you go back in history and look at how the Indians traveled, they traveled to the burning waters. And that was methane in the water, and that was for warmth in the wintertime.
Okay, so if Native Americans, right, he calls them Indians, we call them Native Americans. If Native Americans were going to the burning waters to keep warm, that's one thing. They weren't drinking the methane water. They weren't watering their crops with the methane water. They weren't putting the chemical-rich slurry all over their bodies, right? I mean, this is just so absurd. He said that he found this out at seminars that are free. In my experience, Louis,
yeah, I wonder who's providing those free seminars.
Yeah, in my experience, when there's a free seminar, they're either selling you something or you are the product. You are what is being sold, right? And I think that's exactly what's going on here. His logic appears to be, if we burn something to keep warm or to create energy, it's safe to eat or drink. That seems to be the principle he's applying here. It was sometimes burned to keep warm, thus it's not a concern to drink it. What about coal, right? Does this apply to anything else other than this licorice methane gas that is flammable?
Well, he's also trying to make the point that methane in water has existed for a very long time and that it occurs naturally. Well, you know what? Yeah, that's true. The problem is that water sources that previously did not have methane in them, that tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people rely on for drinking, becomes tainted with methane after fracking operations happen near them. So that is the problem.
Sidebar, more and more evidence mounting that fracking causes earthquakes. We'll have more on that, I'm sure, very soon, as we've already covered it. Donate a Twitter retweet or Facebook share to The David Pakman Show by going to donateyouraccount.com/David Pakman Show. We will take a break, your voicemails, and more coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've been speaking for years on this program about how if those who claim to want to reduce abortions really wanted to reduce abortions, they would do what it takes to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. And as we know, teaching realistic, comprehensive sex education goes a long way. It has been proven time after time to reduce unwanted pregnancy. We go to California, where a California school district has agreed to temporarily shelve a 9th grade sex ed book after parents complained that it included materials that were inappropriate for teenagers, including information about masturbation, orgasms, and erotic touch. The parents are asking for the removal of Your Health Today and have compared the book to pornography. The textbook made it into Fremont School District after health teachers unanimously selected it from about a half dozen options for teaching sex ed. The petition describes there's a petition to that successfully worked to temporarily at least shelve this book. The petition describes the material as college level and says that the parents are deeply concerned. There's a section, this is a quote, there's a section that tells you how to talk to your kids, how to talk to your prospective partners about your sexual history. How does that relate to a 14-year-old kid? I don't see it at all. When I read this, I thought to myself, we teach children many things that don't relate to their immediate reality, right? This applies across so many different subjects. It seems to me that contemplating one's sexual past with a new partner might actually lead to more cautious sexual behavior rather than influence children to become completely out of control.
And I mean, the idea that this information won't be important in the future, that they can't use this in the future. I mean, you're just kind of laying a foundation, and it's only for the better.
I have to tell you, Louis, as I was reading the articles and the controversy around this and the petition, if this is inappropriate for 9th graders, what you and I had in sex ed, or I guess it was called health, in 6th grade was definitely inappropriate if the standard is this petition.
I know we had some pretty graphic stuff going on between 6th grade and 8th grade. There was really no comparison.
So if it's true that this book is marketed as primarily a college textbook, it is certainly a question that can be asked, which is if it's marketed for college, then is it appropriate for 9th graders? That's not an invalid question to me at all. But the issue for me seems to be this reflexive, non-thinking reaction that if there's anything in there that sounds more or less graphic, it's wrong. children at 14 are talking about this stuff, right? And that there's no question about that. They're talking about it amongst their friends. If they're on the internet, almost definitively they're coming across this type of material. The question is, given that that's going on, does it make more or less sense to try to educate them properly, sensibly and comprehensively in class? And to me, every time I look at a study, the answer is a resounding yes. It does make sense to educate kids in a more logical and comprehensive way.
We have information from all over the country that shows that doing this, educating kids earlier about this, prevents unwanted pregnancies, therefore prevents abortions, prevents the transmission of STDs, you name it.
The wife of a Texas anti-gay crusader has finalized her divorce from him to be with her lesbian partner. The leader of anti-LGBT group activist and partner of Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott has ended his marriage with his wife because it turns out she is in a relationship with another woman. Corinne Morris Rodriguez Sáenz was dating another woman when she filed for divorce from Jonathan Sáenz in 2011. Less than 6 months later, Jonathan Sáenz took over as the president of the state's top anti-gay group. They call themselves Texas Values. As it turns out, we don't even need to get into the details. It turns out that his wife was seeing another woman. Initially in the divorce proceedings, Jonathan Sáenz tried to prevent his wife from having any parental access to their children. That has not been agreed upon by the court. The mom will be able to see her children and to continue raising her children. And the divorce finally became final. I guess now Jonathan Sáenz is definitely going to be anti-gay.
I think it's pretty solidified right now. What I love about this story is just imagining how angry all of this must make this guy. And that kind of makes me happy. And maybe that's bad, but that's what happened.
Yeah, well, the idea, I think, Lewis, is not so much that we're laughing about the fact that his marriage fell apart, but the fact that he has taken it as his life's mission to oppose equality for gay, lesbian, LGBT individuals. And as it happens, his own household is directly affected by this, and his own children, by decision of a judge, will be raised in part by this lesbian mother who presumably he thinks, based on being a lesbian, can't be a good mother. It's just incredible, and I can't say it enough. Good for her. I can only imagine how miserable that existence must have been for her.
She probably grew up in an anti-gay household. I don't know. Maybe, from every angle, she was being told that it wasn't good, wasn't true. But yeah, good for her. I'm glad she found her way and made the right decisions eventually.
If you have any comments, questions, complaints, or insults for the show, 219-2DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Very short voicemail from the Eggman. Haven't heard from him for a while. Checking in about Sarah Palin's latest word salad. Listen to this.
Ironically, Sarah Palin is the fast food worker of word salading.
Yeah, a very quick voicemail from the Eggman, but expanding a little bit further on our chef analogy. And one more voicemail here. Take a listen to this one.
Hey, it's John. I'm a member, and I'm so glad to see the video broadcast of your shows out early. I usually try to catch the podcast earlier in the afternoon, but now that it's video, it's the perfect time for me to watch it when it comes on. Like I get it about 4:30. So
yeah, absolutely. For people who don't know, we recently announced on the bonus show that we have finalized some tech upgrades in our studio, which now allows us to provide members with the commercial-free full-hour TV show, which on YouTube you may only see as individual clips, or maybe you just listen to the audio on the podcast. That full video is now available about 90 minutes earlier than it has been for the last year and a half. Very, very exciting, and just another reason to become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. You also get access to the bonus show on today's bonus show. Very, very interesting story involving the DEA and Amtrak. We will talk about sewage snow in Flagstaff. It doesn't sound good. We'll also talk about rules around naming your child in Iceland. That and much more on today's bonus show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to become a supporter today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.